Awesome. Thank you so much. So this is my notice to say that we will be recording this session so we can share for folks who are not able to attend. So one thing that I'm just going to remind everybody is please do try to keep your microphone off when you are not talking. And it's even not, well, I like seeing everybody's faces. But as we start going through the presentation and maybe before we come back to questions, we may want to turn off our video in order to preserve bandwidth for the recording. So maybe just folks, when you are recording or when you are talking, turn on your video and then maybe we'll keep it off until questions. And then that way we'll be in good shape. So I do actually have slides. So this is our fall 2020 end of work cycle update for stakeholders. This is the quick agenda for today's meeting. I'm going to do a little welcome. Then we're going to hear from our 3 projects that were on sprint this work cycle, talk a little bit about what's scheduled in the next work cycle, and then have lots of space for questions. So really the scope of this meeting and why this meeting started, this is our first one. And one of the reasons why we decided to do this was actually feedback from stakeholders. When we originally kicked off the project, we were doing weekly product updates and it just got to be a little bit much. We were hearing from people it was too much, too often. And really trying to figure out the best way to make sure that everyone was aware of what was going on. And one of the stakeholders in a meeting suggested just doing one quarterly. And we are right now working in these 60-day on-off work cycles, which works out to be approximately quarterly. And so thought this might be a better approach moving forward is just having a time where we can share with you all what we accomplished during the work cycle that just ended. So we just ended 2 days ago. And basically for each product, we're going to plan to answer the following questions at a fairly high, work cycle level per product, talking about what the goal of the work for that project was during the work cycle, what we actually accomplished, whether or not we set out to, whether or not we did everything we set out to accomplish, and then what's coming up next. So just a reminder, because we have, sort of the same team working on a bunch of products, not every Surfliner product is on sprint during each work cycle. So in this past fall work cycle, we had 3 products where there was activity. For comment, we started the comment requirements gathering. So we'll hear from Gabriella and Tom about how that's going. We also had some sprints scheduled to put together the Lark MVP, and that was actually the most development work happened this sprint on Lark. So we'll hear from Tom Johnson about that since Jessica is not able to be here. And then finally, we did have some work happen on Shoreline. And so we'll hear from Tom Brittnocker and Alexandra. So that's my last slide for later. So without further ado, I am going to stop sharing and turn it over to Tom to talk about Lark.
Thanks,
and I'm going to turn off my video.
Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about the Lark development cycle. Christy sort of tipped the hand that the goal of the Lark work cycle this round was to put a Lark MVP into production. And I'm going to start, I guess, by just unpacking a little bit about what Lark is and what's in the MVP and what's not. And then I'll talk briefly about what we did accomplish, what remains in the gaps, and then at least some guesses about what might be next for Lark. So Lark is a centralized cross-campus authority platform. It's sort of unique amongst the Surfliner products in that our intent is really to have one Lark system for as many UC campuses as are participating in Surfliner. And that really has to do with the goal of authority alignment across the campuses. So we really want to have one data model for how we're handling authorities, and we want to be sharing some of the overhead of names and labels and all of the sort of identity issues that are wrapped up in authorities. In the long-term, Lark use cases involve complicated reconciliation and cross-referencing to external authorities, and things like specific recommended campus label usages over external labels at external authority providers and those kinds of things. But the MVP that we scoped out for Lark is really quite a bit narrower. So we have a data model for Lark that's based on SKOS, Simple Knowledge Organization System. And our goal is to have an API for managing authority records in that data model. In particular, we seek to support out at the MVP level, we seek to support two types of authority records, broadly scoped concepts, the kinds of things you might use for subject data, and agents, which might be people or organizations or other kinds of creator contributor kind of entries. So that's the API, and then we want to provide a web front end offering management of those authorities. So that's create, read, update, delete, your basic, like, how do I decide what authorities exist and make sure that they continue to exist for external reference, some kind of front end for that. And then a CSV based batch upload. We did quite a bit of work on Lark. People may recall back in the spring of 2019. And at that time, we rolled out a basic configurable data model for concepts and a really bare bones batch upload into an API. And we also built a prototype front end that included just, I think, just view for those objects or for those authority records. What we did this work cycle was to expand the configurable data model work. This in particular is strategic because we think that we'll reuse the infrastructure for configurable data models in other digital library components, not least Comet. And so we built that out. We added ARC-based identity minting, so we can mint ARCs on upload. Additionally, we're handling cases where ARCs already exist at one campus or another by just reusing those existing ARCs. So we don't want, as we load data into a production Lark, we don't want to be reusing or reminting new identifiers for things that one campus is already providing identity for. And then we built out batch upload. So we went through multiple cycles of batch upload using realistic data from UC San Diego. We added support in the CSV-based batch upload for internally delimited multi-value fields. So if you have 10 values for one field, there's a mechanism for doing that, even though that's a little bit awkward with CSV. And we added support for language tagged label strings. We did a lot of work on the infrastructure. So where we had left things last year was that the Lark deployments, the Lark API would deploy, but it didn't have persistence for its backend storage or a real search provider. So we're now deploying the full Lark API stack. We're also sort of deploying the prototype front end, but I'll say more about that actually right now, because the next thing is that we made some belated inroads on the front end. So for most of the work cycle, our front end development process was sort of on hold as we were trying to find time for a discussion about technology choices. The previous front end prototype was a JavaScript single page application, and we don't have as a team a lot of experience maintaining that kind of system. So we made a decision late in the work cycle to move the front end development over into a new space as a simple Rails app, which looks a lot more both for the programmers and in terms of the kinds of infrastructure that we need for deployment. It looks a lot more like our other projects. So, Matt Critchlow and I spent a little bit of time last week replacing the front end with a new one, essentially. And that, on the one hand, we think that has put us on a much better footing for the long-term maintenance of that system. But on the other hand, it leaves us without a demoable front end at the end of the cycle. So that brings me to gaps. The biggest one is those front end features. The good news on this front is that we don't think we're terribly far from actually being able to close out the MVP front end features, at least in their simplest form. So I think that work on that will continue over the coming weeks, probably not very much over the next couple of weeks for obvious reasons. But I think that we plan to carry on with that work. Another major gap that I haven't really mentioned yet is that one of the MVP features is complex label support. So labels as entities in their own right, which have alternate display based on campus or based on the source that the label came from. So if we're, for instance, pulling data in from LC, then we want to know that that's an LC sourced label. And we have a data model sketched for that based on the SCOS label extension for labels, SCOS XL. But the implementation of that from the configurable model isn't in place. So that's remaining work. The other substantial piece that we need to get to production is that we're not yet doing cross-campus data loads. So I mentioned that we've done a number of cycles with UCSD's CSV data, and that was a strategic decision because we're, as a group, I think we're a little bit more anxious about being able to support UCSD's existing authorities than we are about supporting UCSB's. So that's why the focus has fallen there. But in order to get into production, we really want to be able to do large scale loads of both campuses' data and see how they interact together. So that's a piece that we're remaining to work on. And then last but not least is that there's a few details about where we're going to host this thing and how and other organizational decisions that remain open. So which Lark account will we, or sorry, which Arc account will we use for identity minting, and then where will the actual production API and front-end deployments live. As far as what's next, we still think that this is strategically important work as a precursor to further digital library development. The reason that we've thought Lark is important is that the data that it will store and act as broker for is really critical to interoperability for library collections in general. And as we load data into the rest of the digital library system that Surfliner is building out, we really do want to have an authority system in place so that we're controlling the authorities properly up front and continuously. So I think that we'll probably find a way to get this work over the hump. I think it sounds like a lot when I say it this way, but there's honestly not all that much technical work remaining. So we're pretty confident that we'll be able to get something out the door. But I think there's still some planning to do about how we're going to get that done, either as a precursor to or during Comet work cycles. I'm not sure how I've done on time, but I think we're meant to do questions at the end. Is that right?
Yeah, that was what we had planned. And actually, you're
I'm pretty much right on, aren't I?
You're pretty much right on.
Great. So I'm happy to hold questions for the end. Then that's perfect for me.
And I would just take this moment to encourage anyone who has questions now. Feel free to start typing things into the chat, and we can get to them at the end and just keep things rolling. All right, so I think next up is Alexandra and Tom Brittnacker to give us a quick update about Shoreline.
Yes, hello. Just a reminder, Shoreline is our geospatial data digital library. We already have our MVP up and running, although I just noticed a few minutes ago it's down again. For this work cycle, we had three main goals. The first was to stabilize Geoserver so that it doesn't go offline so frequently, and that there's a mechanism to determine the status of the system. The second goal was to improve our metadata preparation workflows, to speed up the process of preparing data for ingest, because that was a real hurdle, was just getting the data, the metadata ready and the data ready for ingest. And then the third piece was to provide additional documentation for end users of geodata, such as about and help pages and an overview document for stakeholders. And I should back up, I need to remember to say this, that Shoreline is our internal project name, but geodata is the public name at both UCSB and UCSD, so users will know it as geodata. All right, so what did we accomplish? So in terms of Geoserver stabilization, what we did was we were able to get a signal out of Geoserver and Solar to determine their status. And then, at that point, it's okay, so we have the ability to get the signal out, and then it's up to each local campus to incorporate that into their own systems of how they want to monitor the system. And we also identified that like the Geoserver stability issues that we're seeing are primarily a local UCSB issue. But we do want to keep the conversation going within Shoreline as well to solve the problem. And so what we're hoping to do is have a Surfliner DevOps sprint specifically dedicated to the stability of digital library systems. Hopefully do that in January. Because these are issues that go beyond just Shoreline, and so that's what we're hoping to do to see if we can solve these problems of the system going down so frequently, and how it can get itself back up, or how we can monitor that. All right, as for metadata workflows, we did develop an enhanced data and metadata workflow that automates the processes and streamlines quality control. So this, I'm really happy and excited to get this implemented. So Dave Henlon developed a Python script that extracts metadata out of the original shapefiles metadata and creates a spreadsheet. And it's so much faster to QC a spreadsheet than to have to go into each individual shapefile, especially when we're talking about 93 files from San Luis Obispo County covering, various, roads and property boundaries and all those types of things. And so to be able to QC it all in a spreadsheet is a lot faster. And then he wrote another script that then takes that information and combines it with the original to create the ISO metadata XML. So it's our metadata of record. And that's used for ingest. And also that CSV, the spreadsheet that's generated is saved into CSV format, and that's also part of the ingest. And what this is able to do is, previously there was certain metadata that was hard-coded in the ingest script or entered on the command line during ingest. And so by putting it in the CSV, then that makes it much more easy. With that original hard coding and all of that, we knew was temporary. So this is a way now for each campus to input those variables using that CSV. And then Alex adapted the ingest script to incorporate these changes so that the system now reads the CSV and the ISO metadata XML to create the metadata. And this workflow is applicable to both campuses. So, we definitely worked to see how we could, streamline it, and also in a way, learn from each other the best way to manage the data and the metadata through the process. And so we're also hoping to work with UCLA, hoping to start to bring them into the conversation and see how this would be applicable to them as well. So we're currently doing some final testing on that. We ran into a few problems with diacritics that we're trying to fix. But we'll begin using these workflows to import data into GeoData beginning in January. And so I'm really hoping that if all goes well, we'll be able to crank up this process and get a lot of data in pretty quickly. On the documentation front, unfortunately, there was insufficient time to create any of the documentation, but we determined it was a lower priority because we weren't directing users to GeoData yet. But that will become a high priority next year. So for next steps, so January to June, the main push is going to be to upload data sets into GeoData at both campuses, and then work with the stakeholders to determine the priorities for the summer sprint. And continue to address those stability issues. And then next summer, during the summer work cycle, we're hoping to further develop the interface and the functionality. And hopefully by the end of the summer, there'll be enough content and documentation and functionality that we can advertise it and consider it released, and start working with users to actually have them download data. And so that's all I have.
Awesome.
I was going to ask Tom if there's anything you want me to add.
Oh yeah, yeah. Thank you. I was going to ask if you wanted to add anything. Sorry about that.
I mean, I don't. Unless there's anything that you'd like me to speak on, I think we can.
Maybe if you could just quickly address the stability issue. That's maybe too big of an ask.
Yeah, I don't know. That's not something that can be done quickly, I don't think.
Okay, that's fine.
Maybe that's something at the end, if there's more questions about that we can dive into that a little bit deeper, because I do just want to make sure that we're conscious of time, and make sure that Gabriella and Tom have time to talk about comment progress. But thank you, Tom B. and Alex, for the update. And Gabriella and Tom, I'll turn it over to you.
I'll go ahead and start, Tom. For comment, we haven't been working in a official capacity for this work cycle besides my having asked our stakeholders to go into the Google Doc to add their user stories, and I see that people have been doing that, so thank you. I met with our metadata and research data curation teams yesterday to go over user stories, and I believe that Chrissy is planning to do the same thing for a small group of folks at UC Santa Barbara. Please note that I did push the cutoff date for adding user stories to January 8th. So you all still have time to add some juicy stories before the comment team meets the second week in January to review the functional requirements. And I think it's probably something that I can share, Chrissy, but Chrissy, Tom, and I did discuss that we will be creating a slightly expanded group of core stakeholders to review the user stories with the comment project team once the team has made the first pass at the functional requirements doc. Tom, is there anything you want to add?
Sure, I can add just a little bit. The first thing that I'll say is thank you to everybody who has already submitted user stories. Thank you to anybody who intends to do that shortly. It's important to us in making the technology decisions for Comet because it's such a central part of what we're planning for Surfliner writ large, that we have a good understanding of the use cases that people have in mind for management of content. And I think that I'd really like to invite you all to think big and get those stories scoped. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's important to us to hear what your use cases are, and I hope that people aren't self-censoring because they think they're not sure what the scope of the appropriate scope of the ask is. If it has to do with content management, I'd encourage you to submit it and have us try and figure out which things fall into the Comet bucket and which things we might want to push off into other products. The other thing that I'll call out is that there's a variety of technical exploration that's been happening for quite some time in the background. So folks may know that we do have pre-existing relationships at both campuses with the Samvera community. We are keeping our eyes close on what's happening there as we move closer to the point where we're going to be making Comet technology decisions. So if you're seeing opportunities to engage with that community, then that's also worth doing with the anticipation that what we're doing will look something like a Samvera something. Sorry to not be more specific, but I'm trying deliberately to not be specific. So. I think that's all that I have. Gabriella, any last minute thoughts before we pass back for Q&A? Oh, you're muted now.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. My headset blew up, so I had to take it off. Other than the next steps, I think I wanted to save that for probably Chrissy to cover in terms of what's the next work cycle going to look like.
Yeah, I can jump. This might be a good time for me to share my screen again and sort of wrap us up. And so our next official work cycle, and this is really a development work cycle because obviously you've heard that there's sort of ongoing work in the Surfliner context that happens across many of these teams off work cycle. But our next development work cycle is scheduled to begin on March 10th. And really the only goal we have for that work cycle right now is initial comment development work. So we are really hoping, in our past work cycles, we've had a tendency to divide the development team into smaller product teams. And given the scope and also the speed of how quickly we're hoping to make progress on comment, the plan, at least right now, is all hands on deck, which is really exciting. Obviously, between now and then, there's going to be continued work, hopefully potentially on the Lark side, like Tom mentioned. Also, we are really hoping to get, and especially involving the operations folks, in trying to figure out the instability issues that are especially plaguing Shoreline, but also are going to be an issue for the other products if we're not addressing it now. And then also there's the work that Gabriella mentioned in terms of really the product team needing to prepare for the development sprint. So taking all of your user stories and writing them up, starting to make those technical decisions and really pushing that project forward so that we are ready in March to have the development team start their process. And then also on the Shoreline front, there's ongoing work that's happening there in terms of getting data in, which is really, really exciting. And talking about just a little bit our other products, Starlight right now is pretty quiet. It's in production at both campuses and things seem to be going well there. So there isn't much scheduled for that product over the next few months. But I think that is pretty much it in terms of the formal part of this. I do want to invite anyone who has questions. I know that this was a lot of technical stuff, and I will share that for future quarterly updates. We do hope it will be less us talking and more us showing. It's one of the things that's very interesting about development work is sometimes there's not a lot to show. There's a lot of work that happens. And so that is a change. And I also want to take, before I open it up for questions, just an opportunity to thank all of the team members who have contributed to this. Even beyond the development team, we have had a huge amount of stakeholder engagement on the comment side. For Lark especially, we have our subject matter experts, especially from the metadata units, are very deeply involved in that process. And so definitely want to call out their contributions. And likewise, the geospatial folks on the Shoreline side are very, very deeply involved with the development team in that process. It really is it is really a true collaboration, both between campuses and also among the other units. So just want to make sure that that everyone is thanked and recognized for all their hard work. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. And I already stopped sharing my screen and just invite, we can spend the next 15 or so minutes answering any questions folks have, or just talking more generally about how things are going in Surfliner.
Well, I have a few comment questions if I could ask them. I guess, well, two questions. One, when do you see, I know you put up a timeline of the upcoming sprints. When do you see kind of being done with these use cases and really getting into the development activity? And I guess a related question is, have you architecturally already kind of scoped things out, or is that still just in the future?
So I heard a couple different questions there. So maybe I can just knock off the quick one, is that the plan is for development work to begin in March. And so the work to prepare for that development work would be happening between now and then. And Tom and Gabriella, do you want to talk about the other piece?
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in and say a little bit about my perspective on the architecture, and then maybe Gabriella, if you have a different perspective, you can follow on by either correcting or amend or adding to what I'm about to say. So what decisions we've made architecturally, I think it kind of depend on what we mean by that. One of the important architectural decision that I think is really solid about Comet is that it won't be about user content discovery. It's really, we're really intending to build the pieces of the digital library platform that that relate to the management of content. So content identity, lifecycle, descriptive and technical metadata editing. I'd expect that things like derivative management will be part of the Comet use cases, even, and this is where it starts to get fuzzier, Greg, is that I'd expect that we'll develop things like file characterization, fixity, and derivatives handling during Comet work cycles. But whether those pieces of software are the same pieces of software that handle the UI and content persistence concerns is more fuzzy. I'll say that my bias in making the technical decision is going to be towards getting something finished, something MVP-ish out the door right at the start of the actual technical work cycles. We're not trying to build a utopia. We're trying to build something that you all can get content into very early in our work cycle so that we can understand what's actually needed when you start to manage content in it. So what I'm really trying to do from the user stories and requirements that are emerging now is to identify the parts that we need to check off the list at the start, and then we're going to make decisions about where to start development, what dependencies to take on board, what systems we need to stand up on day one to check those off rapidly right at the start of technical work. So that's, again, sort of avoiding being too concrete. And I'm especially eager to do that with such a large group of people. I don't want to like say product names and then decide in February that we're not going to do product name. I'm happy to talk with people more one-on-one about concerns and hopes around products in particular, but I'm not inclined to like suggest that we're going down some kind of specific either in terms of backend storage or in terms of like broad platform adoption. So that's where I'm coming from in this like hedging. But
that's
I'm
good,
happy
Tom. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. So that wasn't like a trick question to get you to reveal something. So
I think that maybe answers your question for your purposes, Greg. But yeah, okay.
And Greg, just to back Tom up a bit, I'm going to rely heavily on his technology skills and his being an expert, my guru here. So I'm not going to be concrete or opinionated at this time either. I think it'll be safer for me to say I think I'm going to be pushing Tom a little bit more once I see the user stories and I see what is going to be developed, what possibly could be product X. But for now, I'm going to be kind of, I'm just going to be nefarious.
The real test is going to be when we start the actual work cycle. Like I've heard some people asking how quickly we'll be able to put content in, and I do want to say, without providing a date, that my hope is that the answer will be pretty much right away. Like we're gonna get something out the door, and we're gonna start getting content in it in at least a provisional way, and that's how we're gonna do development on this thing, is to get content in from the campuses and figure out what folks actually need.
And if I can chime in, the other thing, and I think you were maybe asking about this too, Greg, that's missing is there's obviously a lot of work that needs to happen between January 8th, when the user stories are due, and March 10th, when development work starts. And so really we are, the team right now is sort of waiting for the current action item to be completed, which is to hear from all of our wonderful stakeholders what those user story needs are. And then that is going to, even though it's not on WorkCycle, is going to be a very busy time for the comment team, especially Gabriella and Tom and myself, to start going through these stories, making sure we're understanding them, reaching out to stakeholders for more information, and starting really to get an idea of the specifics to prepare so that we are ready in March to actually start work on the thing. So, so there should be updates as that process goes along, and as we get more information. We're just right now, we're waiting on the information from stakeholders in order to, and I did add this to the chat, but UCSB folks, I will be putting things on the calendar tomorrow before I go on vacation for that first week in January, for anyone who's interested to work together and going through the stories and adding anything that we see is missing. Does that answer your question, Greg?
Oh, it does, thanks, yeah. I have another question, but I'll defer if there's, let somebody else ask. So.
We'll be nice, Greg, I promise. Go ahead, ask.
Okay. Well, I'm a little concerned about the system stability issues that you mentioned. I'm just wondering how big of an impact they are. And I just know that as a developer myself, that's a real drag when ideally you want to develop something and it's done and it's solid, and then you can build on that, because there are 19 things you have to build on top of it. And if that thing that's down at the bottom of the stack is flaky, it can be just a real drag. And I'm just wondering, is this a big impact? Do you have an idea of where the problems are or what the nature is?
We do, and I'm aware that Greg, that we're on the calendar for right after this. So I'm happy to dig into technical details and the needs around that, at least on the UCSB side. I'll say that the impact is moderate, broadly speaking, and in some cases, it sort of depends on the complexity of the stack behind the system. So Shoreline is experiencing a couple of different problems, both related to Java services that it depends on, which are particularly challenging because those services are hard to get from other from like, they're not commodity cloud services that we can just buy, and that it's a high priority for us. We've had some deep conversations about how to address it as Surfliner and as UCSB as well.
Yeah, and I'll just add a reminder to that, as far as I'm aware, we have not been seeing these instabilities in Starlight Spotlight, which is the system that we have users actively in. And so while we are seeing it with Shoreline, as Tom B mentioned, we haven't actually rolled that out to stakeholders yet. It's in production, but we aren't actually actively inviting users to participate. It's still very much in a beta state. And some of that's also because we're still also populating it with data. That's the other piece too. And we need that opportunity for those folks to get that in. But that's one of the reasons why we don't want to wait to address it, is that we want to make sure that it is in a good in a good space, and that we've addressed these early before we start seeing them in other products, and before, you know, we really start putting additional stress on the system or advertising it to users.
Great, thanks. And that's all that I can think of for the moment.
So does anyone else have any other questions?
I think everybody's ready for the break. I am.
We were talking about this yesterday, that it feels right now that we've hit mile 18 in the marathon, because this has been quite a year. And, you know, at mile 18, thank you, Amy, because I had heard of this. There's like the wall you hit in the marathon, and that, like, I have observed that, that I feel like everyone is hitting a wall and it's just ready for vacation. So I hope everyone is able to take some time off.
Well, I want to thank Chrissy and Tom B and Alex for being here and to you know, to participate on a Thursday at this time. I really thank you guys.
And I want to extend that to, we have 31 people here today. So thank you all for joining us in our first experiment at what the shape of this will be. We really appreciate you being here. And I do want to invite anyone, if you have questions that you want to ask after this or you think of, please do feel free to reach out to us. We do have a Surfliner channel in the UC Tech Slack. You can also reach us by email. I'm going to give it like 5 more awkward seconds of silence.
The awkwardness is good. That's how we know that people have the space to ask their questions.
All right, people are dropping off. So I'll say thank you officially. Happy holidays. Enjoy your winter break. See you in 2021, which has to be a better year.
Bye.
Oh,
Bye, everyone.